I remember how, in my childhood, my mother used to say to me, "Zoe, you have eyes like a cat. They see everything, even in the dark." She was referring to my observation skills, my ability to notice things that others missed. But I always thought she was wrong, because I failed to see the true nature of the most important person right next to me. For 7 years, I lived side by side with my husband, fed him, carried our mortgage on my back, funded his endless startup projects, and silently endured the mockery of his mother, who constantly referred to me as a plain Jane. And when he finally showed his true face, he did it publicly, in front of 20 people, on a grand scale. He threw me out the door of my own apartment like a maid, with a garbage bag of my belongings in my hands, wearing my heavy work coat, which his mother had already dubbed a janitor's uniform, while she laughed. Loudly, heartily, without hiding it. "Hello, you are tuning into the Times Story Room Times podcast, and this is my new original narrative. Enjoy the listen." But I am getting ahead of myself. For you to understand what happened that night and what followed, I need to start from the very beginning. From the moment my mother died and left me something that I never told anyone about, not my best friend Rachel, not my coworkers, and especially not my husband. It was this secret that ultimately decided everything. My mother's name was Natalie DeMarco. She worked her whole life in commercial real estate development, first as a regular accountant, then as a CFO, and eventually as a co-owner of a small but rock-solid firm. She was a smart, pragmatic, and cautious woman. My father left when I was 9, and she raised me alone. She didn't whine, didn't complain. She just worked. I saw how she drove an old station wagon while methodically saving money, as if it wasn't just a habit, but a lifestyle. When I was 26, she suddenly asked me to come over on a Saturday morning. Her voice on the phone sounded different. Not anxious, but somehow too quiet for her. I drove over. She was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and a folder of documents. "Zoe," she said, "I need to explain something important to you. Listen carefully." That was when my mother told me that 2 years prior, she had sold her stake in the development company. She didn't just sell it. She placed the assets into an irrevocable investment trust. The trustee managing it was Harrison Vance, an old acquaintance of hers, a corporate attorney whom I vaguely remembered from a few shared dinners. Dry, a man of few words, always in a tailored suit, reliable as a vault. "This trust," my mother pronounced, and I noticed her hands weren't shaking, "belongs to you. The assets are frozen right now. You will learn about the portfolio when the time comes. Harrison will contact you himself. I only ask one thing of you. Do not tell a soul, not a single person, until you yourself decide that the time is right." "Mom, what are you talking about?" I looked at her, bewildered. "What does 'when the time comes' mean?" "It means when you finally figure out who is standing next to you and why." 8 months later, she died. Pancreatic cancer. It was devastatingly fast. I still can't talk about it for long. I'll just say that when Harrison Vance called me 3 weeks after the funeral and spoke her name, I wasn't surprised. She had done everything exactly as she said. We met in his downtown office. He explained to me that the investment trust, Vanguard Active was a legal entity that owned shares in several enterprises, including a massive industrial and logistics conglomerate called Vanguard Holdings. My mother's share at the time of the sale amounted to 72% of the stock. Now, that was my share. I sat across from him and thought I was either dreaming or going crazy. "How much is that?" I didn't finish the sentence because my tongue simply refused to obey, enough so that you will never have to work a day in your life. Harrison Vance said evenly. "Dividends are paid out quarterly. I handle all the management, make decisions within the authority granted to me, and coordinate the overarching strategy with you. Your job is to live." Your mother asked me to convey exactly that to you. I walked out onto the street and stood by his building's entrance for 10 minutes. Pedestrians walked around me. I didn't notice them. One thought pounded in my head. My mother knew. She knew that money changes people. She knew that vultures can smell wealth from a mile away, and she decided to hide me from them in the most foolproof way possible by making sure that on the outside, I looked like an ordinary person with nothing. From that day on, my double life began. On the outside, I was Zoe DeMarco, a senior data clerk at the Municipal Water Authority. A deliberately boring, deliberately invisible position. Average salary, an unfashionable coat, a used Honda Civic. I lived in a rented one-bedroom apartment, ate at the cafeteria at work, and went to the movies once a month with my friend Rachel. The only person I eventually told the truth to was her. Rachel became the silent guardian of my secret. She didn't ask questions, didn't pressure me, didn't offer unsolicited advice. She just knew and kept quiet. Once a quarter, I drove to Harrison Vance's office. He reported on the state of affairs. I signed what needed signing and drove back to my invisible life. I practically never spent the dividends on myself. A portion went to a charity fund. I anonymously financed a youth shelter on the outskirts of the city. A portion was saved. I didn't know what for. I just felt that the time would come. I met Max when I was 28. He worked as a business development manager at a mid-sized IT firm, wore nice button-downs, and spoke confidently and beautifully. He was charismatic, the kind of man you notice immediately. He knew how to listen, how to joke at exactly the right moment. On our first date, he made me laugh 3 times in a row and remembered that I don't eat ginger, a detail so small that most people miss it entirely. I fell in love genuinely, with that anxious joy that cannot be faked or invented. I wanted to be with him not because he was handsome or charming, but because being with him was easy. I thought we were alike. A year after we met, we got married. His mother, Eleanor, appeared in my life during the second week of our romance and never left. A large, loud woman with the mannerisms of someone convinced of her own exclusivity. Even though her entire biography consisted of 20 years working as a mid-level county administrator, she loved to philosophize about social standing, about people's levels, about how a real woman must match her man. Upon our first meeting, she gave me a look that jewelers call an appraisal and asked, "Zoe, forgive me, but what is it you do?" I said, "Data clerk at the Water Authority." She nodded with that slight, barely noticeable squint that means, "I see, below average." From then on, to her, I was a plain Jane. Not out loud, no. Eleanor was smart enough not to be openly rude, but she knew how to make you feel completely out of place in any room she occupied. A glance lingering just a second too long on my handbag. A comment about my modest tastes delivered with a smile that couldn't quite be called malicious. A habit of mentioning women from her son's past during conversations, women who were brighter, livelier, more interesting. Max didn't stop her. He'd say, "That's just how Mom is. She doesn't mean any harm." I accepted this excuse for the first year or two, then stopped accepting it, but stayed silent. That was my mistake. The first 3 years of our marriage were exactly what the first years are for many. Some good things, some hard things, friction, attempts to understand one another. Max changed jobs not because he was fired, but because every year and a half, someone would offer him a perspective. The perspective inevitably turned out to be less than promised. He moved from one company to another, started projects and abandoned them, came up with business ideas and never followed through. Meanwhile, the money drained away. Executive leadership seminars, $5,000. Consultations with a business mentor, $3,000. Business dinners with important people, $2,000. A new tailored suit for a crucial meeting, $4,000. I looked at these expenses and kept quiet. I worked, got my salary, and paid the mortgage. Yes, the mortgage. The apartment we lived in was solely in Max's name. Eleanor had suggested this at the very beginning. The apartment should be registered to the man. It's the right way. It's traditional. A man should be the master of his home. Max agreed without blinking an eye. I was naive enough back then not to see the trap. I was just too tired to argue. I signed what I signed and forgot about it. I paid every month out of my salary, and from a small amount I allowed myself to withdraw from my dividend account, carefully staying in character as a modest clerk. I kept all the bank statements and receipts. That was also a habit from my mother. She used to say, "Zoe, never lose your paperwork. Paperwork is memory that never lies." In the 4th year of our marriage, something began to change. Not suddenly, not with a scandal, but quietly, the way the weather changes in autumn. It still feels warm, but it's not the same anymore. Max started coming home later. He stopped asking how my day went. He started putting his phone face down. At first, I didn't pay attention. Then I noticed. Conversations at the dinner table grew shorter. He looked away, not angrily, not tiredly, but specifically times away asterisk, the way people look when they are thinking about someone else. I didn't cause scenes. I asked questions calmly. Without shouting, he would say, "Everything is fine. I'm just busy." Pressure at work. I believed him. Or pretended to believe him. To this day, I don't fully know which. In our 5th year, he met Diana. I didn't know her name for a long time. At first, it was just a feeling, something that can't be explained in words but that any woman understands without explanation. Then a stray phrase, then a name on his phone screen that he didn't manage to swipe away when I walked into the kitchen. I saw it. He saw that I saw. But we both pretended nothing happened. Diana was 30 years old. I found out about her later, much later, when everything went down. And then I realized something crucial. Diana was the daughter of Arthur Sterling, a member of the board of directors of Vanguard Holdings. The very same one. Coincidence? No. But more on that later. About a year before the night I am describing, Max came home with an unusual expression on his face. Not joyful. No. More like the face of a man who just won at poker and still can't quite believe it. He sat at the table, poured himself some water, set the glass down, picked it up again, all in total silence. "What happened?" I asked. "I've been offered a position," he said. CEO, an industrial and logistics conglomerate called Vanguard Holdings. I looked at him. My heart did something strange. It didn't drop, no. Rather, it paused for a fraction of a second, the way a pendulum pauses at its highest point before swinging the other way. "How were you offered this?" I asked carefully. "Arthur Sterling. He's on the board of directors. He recommended me. They changed leadership. They needed a new guy, young, proactive, thinking outside the box." He paused. "Do you understand what this means?" "I'm not a manager. Not a VP. I'm the top executive. A company car, a corner office, full budget authority. I understand," I said. It was the truth. I understood, just not at all what he was thinking. The next morning, I called Harrison Vance. "Harrison," I said, "are you aware of the appointment of the new CEO at Vanguard?" A brief pause, then his usual even voice. "Zoe, I was planning to call you myself. It happened through the board of directors, bypassing the standard trust approval procedure, technically a violation of protocols, legally debatable for now. The appointment was finalized 3 days ago. His name is Max. Max Edward," I said. "He is my husband." The silence lasted about 5 seconds. For Harrison Vance, that was an eternity. "I see," he finally uttered. "What do you want to do?" "Observe for now," I replied. I hung up the phone and stared out the window for a long time. Behind the glass was a standard suburban courtyard. Oak trees, park benches, a beat-up car parked by the garages, the most ordinary world, where nothing had changed, but inside me, something had already shifted. The pendulum had swung. I decided to wait. I wanted to make sure, wanted to give him a chance. Not because I was naive, but because I was fair. Maybe he would surprise me. Maybe he would take the job seriously, lead the company wisely, and prove his worth. I didn't rush to conclusions. The first few weeks he was on pins and needles. Calls, meetings, coming home late. He talked about strategy, new contracts, departmental restructuring. Eleanor came to our apartment almost every day, sitting in the armchair in the living room and looking at me with a new expression. Not her usual disdain, but overt triumph, as if she had known her whole life that her son would become great, and she had finally lived to see it, while I would just remain stuck with my test tubes and utility bills. "Zoe," she said to me over tea one afternoon, "don't you think it's time you worked on yourself? Max needs a different kind of wife now. Not a different woman, God forbid. I mean, you need to match his new status. Attend charity galas. Dress differently. Speak to the right people. I'll think about it," I said. "Think faster," she replied with a smirk. A month after the appointment, Harrison Vance called. His voice was as even as always, but I had learned to distinguish the shades of his calmness. "Zoe, I need to meet with you. There are a series of transactions that require your attention." We met the next day. He placed several sheets of paper in front of me, printouts of financial operations. 4 contracts with independent contractors signed in the last 3 weeks, all 4 at prices significantly above market rates. One of the contractors had been registered in the state just a month before the contract was signed. The legal address was a residential apartment. "This could be a coincidence," Harrison said cautiously. "It could be," I agreed. "Keep monitoring," he nodded. I stood up and walked to the door. I stopped at the threshold. "Harrison," I said, "when you have the complete picture, call me immediately. Any time of day or night." "Of course, Zoe." I walked out onto the street. Autumn had fully taken over. Cold air, gray skies, the smell of wet leaves. I walked to the bus stop and thought that my mother apparently knew how to read people better than I did. She wasn't afraid of wealth. Wealth in itself isn't dangerous. She was afraid of what it does to people who aren't ready to receive it, how it inflates the traits inside a person that used to be kept within reasonable bounds. Greed, vanity, the illusion of impunity. That evening, Max came home late, highly agitated. He talked about negotiations, partners, how he planned to completely upgrade the corporate fleet. I listened to him, looking at him across the table, thinking, asterisk, he doesn't know. Asterisk, he sits across from the majority shareholder of the company he runs, tells her about his plans, and suspects absolutely nothing. I felt no malicious joy. I felt exhaustion and a strange, sharp clarity. The very clarity my mother talked about. Eyes like a cat. I was finally starting to see in the dark. Over the next 2 months, the picture became crystal clear. Harrison Vance called 3 times. New details every time. Corporate entertainment and representation expenses had quadrupled. One of the shell contractors turned out to be linked to Arthur Sterling, the very same man whose daughter was Diana. Max signed a letter of intent under which a highly profitable, independent division of the holding was to be spun off into a separate entity, co-owned by, guess who? This is no longer the mistake of a young executive. Harrison Vance said when we met for the 3rd time. On the desk in front of him lay a folder twice as thick as the first one. "These are systemic actions. Title 18 of the U.S. Code, wire fraud and embezzlement. At these amounts, up to 20 years, I stared at the folder. Inside were documents signed by my husband. Contracts, protocols, wire transfer authorizations, all bearing his signature. "When will you have everything ready to hand over to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney?" I asked. "We already have enough material," he replied. "But I am waiting for your word." I nodded, stood up, and buttoned my coat. "Wait for now. I'll tell you when." I didn't yet know exactly when I would say it. I thought maybe next week. I thought maybe after I spoke to Max personally. I wanted to give him a chance not to justify himself. No, just to look him in the eye and see if he fully realized what he was doing. But fate had other plans. It didn't give me that opportunity. No quiet conversation, without witnesses, with dignity. Instead, it gave me something else. A celebratory dinner party. 20 people in my living room, a trash bag with my belongings by the door, and words I had never heard from anyone in my entire life. But there was still a week left before that night, and in that final week, I worked. I was covering for a coworker who was out with pneumonia, leaving for work at 7 a.m. and returning past midnight. Max barely called. Eleanor dropped by once. I was at work. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Asterisk Zoe, call me when you have time. We need to talk about something important. Asterisk, I didn't call. I knew what she wanted to talk about, and I didn't want that conversation. Not because I was afraid, I just felt it. It wasn't time. The time would come on its own, and it came on a Friday evening as I was returning from a 7-2-hour shift. In my pocket was my phone. In my phone, Harrison Vance's number. I didn't know yet that I would be calling him that very night. I didn't know yet that the moment I walked into the lobby of my own building, the life I had known for 7 years would end abruptly. Ugly. Publicly. I walked toward the building along the autumn sidewalk. Street lamps reflected in the puddles. My coat was soaked from the rain. In my bag were lab reports and a thermos with cold tea. I looked up at the windows of my apartment on the 8th floor. The lights were on, every window blazing. Festive. Even from out here on the street, I could hear music. I stopped by the entrance and tilted my head back. The 8th floor shone like a jewelry store display on Christmas Eve. All 5 windows bright, every chandelier turned on at once, even though Max usually grumbled about me wasting electricity. From the cracked open window, which I recognized by the familiar tilt of the frame, spilled a muffled roar of voices and something soft, jazzy. I looked at those windows from below and tried to remember if he had warned me about a party. No, he hadn't. Not a call, not a text, not even a brief "I won't be alone." Nothing. I had worked 3 days straight, slept on a cot in the lab's storage room, ate out of a thermos, and replied to his texts briefly and to the point because I had no energy for more. And not once did he write, Asterisk. Zoe, I'm having guests over. Asterisk. Not once. I stood there for another second, not out of hesitation, but simply because I wanted to remember this moment. Then I pushed the heavy lobby door open and walked in. The elevator rose slowly. Here in the cabin, it was quiet. Just the hum of the machinery and the distant sounds echoing down the shaft. Strangers' voices in my home. I looked at my reflection in the mirror on the back wall of the elevator. Dark gray coat, soaked at the shoulders and sleeves. Hair pulled into a ponytail since morning. But a few strands had escaped and stuck to my cheek. Dark circles under my eyes that I had stopped trying to conceal 3 shifts ago. Not because I let myself go, just because there was no time. A duffel bag with work documents. A thermos I never managed to finish. The look of a person who had been on their feet for 70 hours and just wanted to take off their shoes and lie horizontal. I looked at this reflection without pity and without vanity. Just looked and thought briefly. Asterisk. Yes, I look exactly like what I am, and that is fine. I've been working. Asterisk. The elevator doors opened. The voices grew distinct before I even reached the door. Men's, women's, laughter, clinking glass, a sudden burst of hearty laughter from deep inside the apartment. The music was live yet ambient, the kind of soundtrack they play at corporate mixers to create an atmosphere without too much noise. The smell of tobacco. Even though we never smoked in the apartment, it was my only strict rule, which Max had always followed. It meant they were smoking in the entryway, or someone had stepped out into the hall. Light from under our door spilled in a wide golden strip onto the corridor hardwood. I took out my keys. The door opened. And everything hit me at once. The sound, the light, the smells, the strange faces. There were a lot of people. I mentally counted later and guessed around 20, maybe a bit more. The living room was completely opened up. The coffee table had been pushed to the wall. Chairs brought in from elsewhere. The bedroom, the kitchen. I recognized 2 chairs from my own desk. The sofa pushed closer to the window. In the cleared space stood people. Men in expensive blazers, women in cocktail dresses. Some had something sparkling around their necks. Some stood with a glass by the windowsill. Some grouped on the sofa. Others talked by the bookshelf I had assembled myself 3 years ago. On the dining table, pushed against the wall, were hors d'oeuvres clearly ordered from professional high-end catering, alongside tall bottles. No one noticed my arrival right away. I stood in the foyer with my duffel bag and a plastic bag of spare scrubs, looking at this unfamiliar celebration in my own apartment. It was a strange feeling. Not resentment, no. More of a sharp, almost physical sensation of alienation. As if you walked into your home and found someone had changed the wallpaper, then someone finally noticed. A woman by the sofa, in a white dress. Hair styled in an elegant updo. Thin earrings. Her gaze slid over me, lingered for a second on my wet coat, on my bag, on my hair. She said nothing, just turned away and resumed her conversation. The man next to her threw a quick glance over his shoulder, also wordlessly. The voices didn't quiet down. I took a step inside, set my bag by the console table, and started unbuttoning my coat. I'd recognize Eleanor's voice out of 1,000. It was unique. Not loud, not screaming, but possessing a specific piercing quality that cuts through any background noise. She stepped out of the kitchen with the look of a person who had long been waiting for exactly this moment and fully intended to savor it. She was wearing a burgundy velvet dress. I had only seen it in photos before. She wore it for special occasions. A heavy necklace sparkled at her throat, the one she called a family heirloom, though I suspected it had been bought quite recently, likely with the money Max had quietly transferred to her last month. Her face, powdered and triumphant, wore a smile that couldn't be called kind even if you wanted to. "You came after all," she pronounced. Her tone was as if she were saying, asterisk. Wow, the cockroach crawled out looking like that. Asterisk. I came straight from work, Eleanor. I answered calmly. Straight from a shift. 3 days. You know this. I see, she said. In that I see fit an entire monologue, an entire theatrical performance about my inadequacy, my inappropriateness, and my general unsuitability for life in this house. Every word she spoke, every shade of intonation screamed it. She was an expert at this, honed over decades. One syllable, and you understood exactly what she thought of you. She took a tiny step sideways, allowing me to pass, or perhaps simply demonstrating that she had the power not to let me. I walked past her into the living room. I didn't see him right away. He was standing by the window in a circle of 3 men, wearing that dark gray suit brought back from a business trip last month. The one he called his corporate armor, dress shirt with no tie, top button undone, meaning the evening was in full swing. He was saying something, gesturing confidently, beautifully, with that aggressive energy he'd developed. Since getting the CEO job, he had changed, not all at once, but gradually, like a man who puts on new clothes and begins to move differently. The men around him listened with that special attention business people reserve for those they depend on. For a split second, I saw him exactly as I had in the very beginning, charming, persuasive, able to command a room and fill it with his presence. The same Max who remembered I don't eat ginger, and I thought then that he was the most observant person I had ever met. Then he felt my gaze, or someone near him looked my way, and he turned around. Something in his face shifted, not instantly, not sharply, just the way the sky darkens before a thunderstorm, barely noticeable, but irreversible. He said something brief to his companions, a gesture meaning, "Give me a minute," and walked toward me. The men watched him go, then turned back to their own talk. "You didn't warn me," I said quietly when he got close enough to hear without eavesdroppers. "I would have at least changed clothes." "I thought you were staying until morning," he answered. His voice was flat, almost indifferent, that corporate tone he had adopted in recent months, as if we weren't husband and wife but colleagues on neutral territory. My shift was until 6 a.m. They let me out early. My replacement showed up. I looked at him. "Who are all these people?" Partners, senior VPs of several divisions, a couple of board members. He made a vague gesture with his hand. We closed a major contract. I threw a small working dinner. Nothing special. 20 people at 10:30 at night is not a small working dinner, Max. Annoyance seeped into his voice. That specific irritation I knew so well. Quiet, controlled, but real. You can go to the kitchen. It's quieter there. And there's food. I stared at him. I am in my own apartment, Max. I know, he said. Just like that. Asterisk. I know. Asterisk. No apologies. No explanations. Short. Like closing a file. In those 2 words, there was something that made my chest tighten. Not a sharp pain. No. More like a heavy, dull realization. The kind that has been there for a long time, but which you refuse to articulate out loud, even to yourself, because until you say it, it doesn't feel entirely real. I walked into the kitchen. There were people there, too. 2 men by the refrigerator discussing something in hushed tones, holding highball glasses. A woman with a phone stood by the window, staring at the screen. When I walked in, the men glanced at me uninterested, not hostile. They just noted, asterisk, someone walked in, not the person we need. Resume conversation. Asterisk. The woman by the window looked up, scanned me rapidly from my wet coat up to my messy ponytail, and dropped her eyes back to the screen. I put the kettle on, found my mug, the one with the chipped rim that Max had repeatedly offered to throw away, but I refused because tea somehow tasted better out of it. I dropped a tea bag in. Simple mechanical movements the body does on its own while the brain is busy elsewhere. While the kettle heated, I stood by the stove and listened to the voices from the living room, the laughter, the clinking glass. Somewhere out there was Max, speaking confidently and beautifully again. And there was another voice. I realized it gradually, picking it out from the background noise. A woman's voice. High, light, with that special ringing quality of women who are used to being listened to with pleasure. I couldn't hear the words, only the intonations. A short laugh, like a little bell. A pause. Another phrase. More laughter. The kettle boiled. I poured the tea and held the mug with both hands, the way I always had since childhood in my mother's kitchen, using the exact same gestures. I stared at the steam rising from the mug. Inside my head, it was very quiet. Not empty, but quiet. The way it feels right before making a decision that has already been made deep down. It just hasn't surfaced yet. The 2 men by the fridge finished their chat. One grabbed a bottle and walked out. The second followed. The woman by the window slipped her phone into her clutch and also left without a word. The kitchen was empty. And that was when Eleanor walked in. She appeared silently. She had a knack for it despite her heels and the velvet dress. She stood in the doorway, crossed her arms over her chest, and looked at me. On her face was that expression I had long learned to read, though I had never given it a name. Not anger, no. Something sweeter, something intoxicating, like anticipation. She was pleased. She was deriving immense pleasure from what was happening, or from what was about to happen. Zoe, she said. I want to tell you something. Amicably. While we're alone. Go ahead, I replied. She walked further in, stopping at the counter across from me, but didn't sit down. Standing was always her power pose when she wanted to dominate. Back straight, shoulders back, looking down her nose. Even though we were roughly the same height, you're a smart woman, Zoe, she began. I've always admitted that. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like the prologue to a sentencing, where the first phrase is a formal show of respect to the defendant. And exactly because you are smart, I will tell you straight, without any preamble. Max needs a different life right now, a different level, a different circle. Continue, I said. Did you see the people in the living room? She nodded slightly toward the door. That is his world now. Big business, serious decisions, money on a completely different scale. He is now the top executive of a massive corporation. His circle consists of people with status, with wealth, with ambition. Their wives are women of a different caliber. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand, I said. He needs a woman who knows how to stand beside a man like that. Who knows how to dress, how to converse with the right people, how to behave at galas. Not a water department clerk who comes home in a wet coat in the middle of his executive dinner, carrying a gym bag and a thermos. She said times his executive dinner times as if it were a universal truth, as if the question of whose apartment this was and who had been paying for it for 7 years was completely irrelevant. Are you talking about divorce? I asked. I am talking about common sense. She tilted her head slightly. You're still young. 34 isn't a death sentence. You'll find someone of your own. Someone good, calm, on your level. A modest man. Max won't leave you stranded. He'll pay you out fairly, decently. No courts, no scandals. You'll just separate quietly. I looked at her over the rim of my mug. Asterisk. Fairly. Asterisk. Coming from her mouth, that word had a highly specific meaning. I remembered the 7 years of mortgage payments, the 7 years of his seminars, his suits, his dinners with important people, all on my dime. His business ideas that I funded silently and that never turned into anything. The apartment, registered in his name at her insistence. Asterisk. Fairly? Asterisk. Eleanor, I said evenly. Are you having this conversation with your own permission? Or Max's? She stiffened slightly. Something in my tone hit a nerve. She had expected something else. Tears, maybe, or justifications, or at least bewilderment. We discussed it. She replied after a slight pause. I see. I said. I placed my mug on the counter. Then I need to speak with him directly. She stood in the doorway, not moving for a few seconds. Something flickered across her face. Either annoyance that I hadn't crumbled, or a quick recalculation of her position. Then she stepped aside, and I walked into the hallway and into the living room. The noise had died down slightly. Not because there were fewer people. They had just migrated. Some went out to the balcony, some to the far corner by the bookshelves. Max was standing by the sofa. Next to him was a woman I was seeing in person for the first time, but whom I recognized instantly. Deanna? I hadn't known her face until this minute, but I knew enough about her. And when I saw her, I knew immediately. Tall, blonde, with that particular smugness in her gaze that belongs to people who, from birth, have never heard the word no. Not malicious, no, just absolutely certain that the world was built for her convenience. Her dress was expensive, not loud, but exactly the way women dress when money is just background noise. She stood next to Max, just close enough for it to be noticed by anyone looking. Not pressed against him, no, but within that zone that says ours, not just colleagues. I walked up to them. Max turned. For a fraction of a second, something flashed across his face. I caught it, though he hid it quickly. Not guilt. No, rather, the irritation of a man whose plans are interrupted at the most inconvenient moment. That petty anger of people accustomed to controlling the room when something breaks the script. Zoe, he said, I asked you. You asked me to go to the kitchen, I said. I was in the kitchen. Now I want to talk to you. 5 minutes in the bedroom. We don't need witnesses. Diana watched me with a lazy curiosity. The gaze of a collector examining an artifact. Interesting, but not threatening. She was so secure in her position that she didn't even feel the need to project hostility. She just looked on calmly. The way you look at a done deal. Later, Max said. Not later. Now. It was the wrong tone. I knew it the second it left my mouth. Not submissive, not pleading, not quiet and wifely. Even, demanding, unapologetic. In his world, in front of his guests, in front of Diana, it was the wrong tone. It broke the script. His face hardened. Stop it, he said in a half-whisper, but not quietly enough to prevent those standing nearby from hearing. Not here, and not now. Max, I just want to talk to you. This is my apartment too. 5 minutes. Zoe, I am your wife. He looked at me for a long time, several seconds. Then, something inside him made a decision. A decision that, I understood, had been made much earlier. It just hadn't been spoken aloud yet. I saw that exact moment. The moment a person crosses the line. Not in a fit of rage, not in the heat of passion, but calmly, deliberately. Like a businessman signing the liquidation papers for an unprofitable asset. "No," he said. "Not anymore." The hum of conversation around us quieted down. People sense the shift in the electric current of a room. It's an animal instinct you can't suppress with good manners. Several pairs of eyes slid our way. A man by the bookshelf turned his head. The woman in the white dress stopped talking to her neighbor. "What do you mean?" "No," I asked. "You are no longer my wife." "Max Sammy." His voice was flat, strictly business. "I am filing for divorce. This isn't news to either of us. We've both known this for a long time. I wanted to handle this like adults, without scenes, but you came in here and started this yourself." "I just came home," I said. "This is no longer your home," he replied. Just as evenly, without anger. "This is exactly how people speak when they want it to sound final. The apartment is in my name. You know that perfectly well. I'm asking you to vacate it. We will agree on a settlement amicably, without the courts." "Max, this apartment was bought during our marriage," I said quietly. "And the mortgage was paid from my account for 7 years. Try to prove it," he answered. I didn't expect those 4 words from him. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they were precise. He knew about the cash. He had insisted on the cash to avoid a paper trail. Asterisk. The IRS doesn't like those kinds of transfers. Zoe. Asterisk. And I agreed, because I believed him, because we were a family, and between family members, there shouldn't be itemized contracts. 7 years. I felt something inside me shift. Very slowly and very precisely. It didn't break, no. It shifted, the way the tumblers of a lock fall into place when you insert the right key. "My mother already packed your things," Max continued, nodding toward the foyer. "Just the essentials. Documents, clothes for the next few days. The bag is by the door. We'll handle the rest by agreement once everything settles down." I turned around. By the coat rack in the entryway sat a large, black, heavy-duty trash bag, neatly tied at the top. It had been there from the very beginning, from the moment I walked in. I just hadn't noticed it because I was focused on other things. A bag with my belongings, packed before I even arrived. That meant it was planned. That meant they were prepared. That meant while I spent 3 sleepless days at the lab, thinking I was doing essential work, here, in my apartment, my mother-in-law was stuffing my clothes into a garbage bag, waiting for me to walk through the door. I turned back. I looked at Max, then at Diana, who was still holding her glass, watching me with that same lazy confidence. Only now, there was something new in her eyes. A slight triumph, barely visible, masked by upper-class politeness, but real. And then, from the back of the living room, came Eleanor's voice. She stepped out of the kitchen and stood in full view of everyone in the center of the room, in her burgundy dress, wearing the face of a lead actress stepping onto the stage. She had been waiting for this. She had prepared for this. This was her grand entrance. "Zoe," she announced loudly, so that the entire living room could hear. "There is nothing to discuss here. Pack up and leave quietly. Don't embarrass yourself." Several people turned their heads. Conversations in the far corners died completely. The man by the bookshelf quietly set his glass down. The woman in the white dress intuitively took a half step back, the way people do when they feel something heavy is about to be thrown. Eleanor stepped forward. She was in her element, a public spectacle, playing the lady of the manor, bringing order to the house. She loved this. Her voice grew even louder, sharper, projecting with that theatrical force she had spent a lifetime confusing with dignity. Max no longer needs a plain Jane with her endless lab shifts and her perpetually exhausted look. There are people who match him, who match his level. his position. She allowed herself a glance toward Diana, quick but deliberate. So everyone would understand. And you, sweetie, need to know your place. An electric shock went through the living room. A few people lowered their eyes. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed quietly in the far corner. Diana took a sip from her glass. A tiny, careless, dismissive gesture. Asterisk, I have nothing to do with this. Asterisk. And then Max took a step toward me. I thought he would stop his mother. Or at least say something quiet and conciliatory. The way he used to do when he wanted to smooth things over. He used to be able to diffuse tension with one sentence without assigning blame. I waited for that reflex. It didn't come. He walked right up to me and grabbed my shoulder. Not violently, but firmly. Exactly the way you grab a person you are about to physically remove. He turned me toward the entryway. I felt the pressure of his palm through the fabric of my coat. Confident, proprietary, alien. He dragged me toward the door in silence. Without explanation, the way an annoying visitor is tossed out of an office. Max, I said quietly. He didn't answer. He shoved me not hard, but enough to make me stumble forward. Then again, the living room swayed and was left behind. We were in the foyer. He pulled the front door open in one sharp motion. The trash bag with my things was by the coat rack. He picked it up and tossed it over the threshold into the hallway. Then, he raised his eyes to me. For the first time all evening, he looked directly at me. No averted gaze, no corporate detachment. He looked at me, and in his eyes, there was no anger, no guilt, no regret. There was only that distinct, disgusted impatience with which one looks at garbage they have been wanting to throw out for a long time. And finally getting the chance to do it. Get out. Help, he said. Quietly, evenly, almost casually. That was the most terrifying part. Not a scream, not a dramatic scene. Just words spoken as if stating the obvious. Like saying, asterisk. Shut the door times or times, turn off the light. Asterisk. Then he slammed the door in my face. From behind the closed door immediately, as if she had only been waiting for the click of the latch, came Eleanor's voice. A ringing, triumphant laugh, loud, from the heart, unsuppressed for a single second. The kind of laugh people let out when they get exactly what they wanted, and it turns out even better than they expected. See, Maxie, how easy that was. I heard through the wood. And no tears. She was smart enough for that, at least. Then the music got louder again. And the voices. And the laughter. Other people's laughter. General. Meaningless. I stood in the hallway. He replied something quietly to his mother. I couldn't make it out, and I didn't try. The door was locked behind me. The hallway was dark. The bulb above the elevator had burned out a long time ago. I had submitted work orders to the HOA multiple times. Through the closed door, I could still hear the music, the hum of voices, the female laughter that light. Ringing one. Life in there was moving on. The gap was filled. The way water fills a footprint on the beach. I picked up the heavy plastic bag and leaned my shoulder against the wall. I just stood there for a few seconds, listening to myself. Inside, there were no tears, no panic, no hysterical paralysis that follows a severe blow. There was something else, hard to name. Very quiet, very cold, and completely stable, like ice. Not thin, fragile ice, but thick, mid-January ice. The kind that holds weight. Then I picked up the bag and walked down the stairs. 8 flights. I counted the steps. Not on purpose. It just happened. On the 3rd floor, I passed the neighbor with the dachshund who had lived across from us for years. We knew each other by sight, not by name. She nodded. I nodded back. The dachshund nudged my leg with its nose, sniffed, and waddled on. On the ground floor, I stopped by the mailboxes and took out my phone. The screen lit up. 11:14 p.m. 11:15 at night. I opened my contacts and found Times HV asterisk. That was how I saved his number a long time ago. Short, and without unnecessary details. I hit call, He answered on the third ring. For a man receiving a call at 11:15 on a Friday night, his voice was surprisingly even, not sleepy. No, Harrison Vance never sounded sleepy. I highly doubted he slept at all. Zooey, good evening, Harrison, I said. I apologize for the hour. It's perfectly fine. What happened? I stood in the dark lobby by the mailboxes and spoke calmly. No trembling in my voice, no unnecessary details. I explained. Divorce. Announced publicly in front of 20 witnesses. He intends to keep the apartment. The mortgage. My money. 7 years straight. I have the entire payment history. I need the full results of the Vanguard Holdings audit by morning. Zoe, he said when I finished. Are you looking to convene an emergency shareholder meeting? Yes, I said. Monday morning, 9 a.m. All members of the board of directors in person, no exceptions. The audit materials must be printed and distributed before the meeting begins. A short pause. The one I knew well. Not surprised. The pause of a precise man preparing a precise response. Tomorrow is Saturday, he said. I know. Then Monday at 9 a.m. Everything must be prepared. A slight hesitation. Zoe, there is one more thing. Tonight, meaning right now, the system flagged attempts to execute several large transactions. I blocked them. How much? A combined total of $50 million. 2 different recipients. One is a shell company registered to an individual. The second, I will confirm by morning, but preliminarily, it is an account in Florida, registered to Eleanor Irene. Eleanor, his mother. So, while they were enjoying their triumph in the living room, a parallel triumph was taking place, an invisible, financial one. My soon-to-be ex-husband was celebrating his victory over me while simultaneously draining corporate accounts to his mother's personal account. Understood, I said. Keep all transactions blocked. Nothing clears without my explicit authorization. Done. And Harrison. Prepare the filings for the division of marital assets. The apartment address. I gave him the address. The mortgage was paid from my personal checking account for 7 years. Starting from the day of closing. I have the entire paper trail. I want a lawsuit drafted. It will be ready by morning, he said simply. Zoe, where are you right now? By the building entrance, I replied. Do you have somewhere to go? Yes, I do. Good. And then, after a pause, so quietly I wasn't sure if I imagined it, Natalie would be proud. I didn't answer. I put the phone in my pocket. I stood for a little while longer in the dark lobby by the mailboxes, listening to the silence. From 8 floors up, the faint thumping of the bass trickled down. Then that, too, stopped. Or maybe I just stopped hearing it. I walked out onto the street. The autumn night greeted me with a chill and wet asphalt shining under the streetlights. I raised my hand. A taxi pulled over almost immediately, as if it had been waiting. I threw the trash bag into the back seat, got in, and gave the address. The driver, an older, silent man with the radio on low, pulled away without a word. I looked out the window at the city drifting by. Nocturnal, wet, indifferent. The city didn't know what had happened, and it didn't care. Yellow smears of streetlights on black pavement. Dark storefronts. A few late-night pedestrians. I thought about my mother. About that conversation in her kitchen 8 years ago. 2 cups of tea and a folder of documents. She sat across from me, speaking in that steady voice people use when they have thought long and hard about what to say, and have finally decided to say it. She already knew she was sick back then. She didn't tell me, but she knew. And despite that, or perhaps because of it, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about me. About what would happen to me when she was gone, about the kind of people who would gravitate toward me, about how to protect me without stripping me of my right to live my own life and make my own mistakes. The taxi stopped at Rachel's house. She opened the door quickly. She hadn't been asleep. She looked at me. The coat, the trash bag, the duffel. She read the entire situation in 1 second. the way only someone who has known you deeply for years can. She didn't ask a single question. She just stepped aside, letting me in. "Tea," she said. Her kitchen was warm, quiet, and smelled of something domestic. Maybe she had baked earlier. Or maybe that's just how a friend's house smells when you are truly welcome. Rachel put the kettle on, pulled out the mugs, large, heavy ceramic ones she'd brought back from a trip down south years ago and never replaced. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door. Asterisk, I made it here. Asterisk. That was all that mattered right now. I made it to a safe place. And that was enough. We sat in her kitchen until 2 a.m. Or maybe almost 2 a.m. I wasn't watching the clock. I told her the story calmly, sequentially, without hysterics. The party. Eleanor in the kitchen. Her words. Max. Diana. The garbage bag. Asterisk. The help doesn't belong here. Asterisk. The silence. The door. Rachel listened. She had a gift for listening. It's a rare skill, and she had it naturally. She didn't just nod mechanically, didn't rush to offer advice, didn't interrupt with, "Oh my God, that's awful," every 3 words. She just listened, looked me in the eyes, and made me feel genuinely heard. "Did you cry?" she asked when I finished. "No." "Why?" I thought about it. "Because I've known all this for a long time," I finally answered. I just didn't say it out loud. Not to myself, not to anyone, until something happened that made it impossible to stay silent. And now it's Monday. Rachel knew what that meant. She knew about the trust. The only person I had ever told, not right away, not in the first year of our friendship, but later, when I realized she was the kind of person who wouldn't change just because she knew. She hadn't bombarded me with questions, hadn't gasped in shock. She just absorbed the information and placed it on a high shelf, taking it down only when necessary. "Okay," she said simply. "I'll make up the bed in Anita's room. My daughter is staying with her grandma tonight. Thank you. Are you hungry?" "No thanks. Just want to lie down." She nodded, stood up, and went to make the bed. I stayed in the kitchen for a few more minutes. I looked out the window at the dark driveway, at the lone streetlight casting a glow over the garage, a small, quiet world. The city slept. Only somewhere on the other side of town, my husband was standing among his guests with a glass in his hand, probably thinking that it was all over. I got into bed at 2:30. Anita's room was dark and smelled faintly of her perfume. Young, sweet. A small cactus sat on the windowsill, a few posters on the walls, the kind teenagers hang up and leave there long after they've grown up. I lay there and stared at the ceiling. I didn't think about Max, or Diana, or what Eleanor had said. I thought about my mother, about how she said, "Zoe, you have eyes like a cat," about how she sat across from me at the table with 2 cups of tea and talked about the trust, quietly, precisely, without unnecessary words, about how she died knowing she had left me not just money, but the ability to not depend on other people's decisions. I fell asleep without noticing, dreamless, without the sensation of falling. The darkness simply gave way to morning. I woke up at 6:30 automatically. I don't have the habit of sleeping in, even after sleepless shifts. I lay there for a minute, listening to the silence of Rachel's house, then got up. I found a new toothbrush in the bathroom. Rachel always kept spares for guests. A clean towel in the hallway closet. I washed my face, brushed my hair, and instead of throwing it into my usual messy ponytail, I pulled it back neatly. The way you style it for an important corporate meeting. I walked into the kitchen. Rachel was already there, standing by the stove in her robe, holding coffee. "Early," she said without turning around. "Habit." She placed a mug in front of me. I wrapped both hands around it. The same ceramic mug. Warm, grounding. I said, "I need something to change into. Something strictly business." Rachel turned and looked me over. Not critically, practically. "I have dark slacks and a white silk blouse. They'll be a bit long on you." But with heels, it'll work. Are your shoes okay? They'll do. She left and returned a minute later with hangers. I changed in her room, then looked at myself in the mirror. Dark slacks, a crisp white blouse, the low-heeled pumps I always wore to my serious meetings with Harrison Vance. Straight back, neat hair, no unnecessary jewelry. I looked exactly like a professional showing up to a job she knows how to do perfectly. Rachel stood in the doorway. "Good," she said. "Thank you. I'll call you when it's over." "Call me." I grabbed my duffel bag, the same one I had brought from my lab shift, containing my work papers, my empty thermos, and something else. A long, long time ago, right at the beginning of my marriage, I had started making photocopies of every single mortgage payment receipt and every bank transfer. I kept them in a separate folder hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk at the water testing lab. Not because I expected exactly this outcome, but simply because my mother had said, "Never lose your paperwork." It was a multi-year habit that had become an automated reflex. 7 years of mortgage receipts and bank statements from my personal checking account, neatly organized in chronological order. Outside, it was bright and cold. The autumn sun hung low, shining straight into my eyes, blindingly crisp. Not warm, but sharp, like a spotlight. I hailed a cab. As soon as I got in, I opened my email. The message from Harrison Vance had arrived at 6:45 a.m. 3 attachments. First file. The master spreadsheet of transactions over the last 4 months. I read it slowly, line by line. The bottom line was this: roughly $90 million in total account movements that required justification. Of that, approximately $42 million went to shell contractors at rates wildly above market averages. At least 2 of the contractors were incorporated less than 6 weeks before the contracts were signed. The registered address of one was a residential apartment. Harrison had color-coded these details, and as I read, the picture crystallized flawless and ruthless. Another $23 million was categorized as corporate entertainment and representation. Upon closer inspection, these were personal expenditures, custom Italian furniture imported and delivered directly to Max's home address. 2 massive invoices from high-end menswear boutiques billed to the company, delivered to him. A private catered event for 40 people at an elite restaurant, paid from the corporate account as client negotiations on the exact night they celebrated Eleanor's birthday, the very dinner where she wore the velvet dress and the necklace. I closed the first file and opened the second. It was a letter of intent. A legally binding roadmap detailing the spin-off of Vanguard's most profitable logistics division into a brand new, standalone corporate entity. Among the proposed equity partners of this new venture, 2 names stood out. The first, Arthur Sterling. The second, his daughter, Diana Sterling, via a deed of gift from her father. The daughter of the board director was about to become a co-owner of a business that, on paper and in reality, belonged entirely to me. I closed the second file and opened the third. This was the summary of the midnight wire transfers. The ones Harrison had blocked. $50 million. 2 sums, 2 recipients. One went to Apex Freight Solutions, an LLC incorporated in Delaware, 3 months ago. The second went to a personal checking account. Eleanor Irene, $30 million to my mother-in-law. In the dead of night, while they were popping champagne and laughing, while Eleanor was triumphantly announcing that the help doesn't belong here, her son was wiring $30 million of stolen money to her personal account. I locked my phone and dropped it into my bag. I looked out the window. The city rolling by was a typical Monday morning metropolis. Business as usual. People with coffee cups rushing to the subway, buses, traffic lights, the normal routine of millions who couldn't care less about someone else's drama. Everything was mundane, normal, and only I knew that right now, in these very minutes, as this taxi drove me toward the glass skyscraper downtown, something massive was ending, and something else was beginning. The pendulum had passed its lowest point and was swinging back with terrifying momentum. The taxi slowed at a red light. I watched the pedestrians and thought about my mother. about how she hadn't just bought me assets or money. She bought me agency, the ability, when the moment required it, to stand up and say no. Not to beg, not to plead, not to argue through tears, just to stand up and say, no, you made a mistake. And this is why. The light turned green. The car accelerated. Vanguard. The letters over the main entrance were chrome, polished, towering. The glass skyscraper reflected the morning sky, gray and milky, as it always is in October. I stepped out of the cab, adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, and buttoned the top button of my coat. The lobby was bustling. The morning rush of corporate employees, security turnstiles, ID badges, hurried faces. I walked through this crowd slowly, without rushing. The security guard at the main desk let his eyes slide over me. Then his gaze snapped back. Something in his posture changed. Not recognition, he had never seen me before, but realization. He quickly straightened up, opening his mouth to speak. But at that exact moment, Harrison Vance appeared from the other side of the lobby. He was walking toward me in his pristine suit, carrying a leather portfolio, exactly the same as always. Dry, precise, quiet. Behind him walked two men in dark suits with security badges. He approached and nodded. Not deeply, not subserviently, just the respectful nod given to a person you trust and respect. Zoe, he said. Everything is prepared. The board is present in full. 8th floor. Conference room A. A slight pause. Max has not arrived yet. According to our tracking, he left his apartment around 8:15. He should be here in a few minutes. Is his badge deactivated? I asked. Deactivated. Security has been instructed to let him into the building, but not past the lobby turnstiles. There are witnesses here. Let it happen here. He paused slightly. It's the right way. I thought for a second, then nodded. Good. I will head up to the board. As soon as he walks in, let me know. Of course. I walked toward the VIP executive turnstile. The guard opened it without a word, simply stepping aside. I got into the elevator and pressed 8. The doors closed. In the elevator mirror, I saw myself. Dark slacks, white blouse, coat, duffel bag, straight back. No tears. No traces of exhaustion. Even though I had slept maybe 4 hours. My eyes were completely calm. I imagined this was exactly how a cat's eyes look in the dark. The doors opened on the 8th floor. A long corridor with a deep burgundy carpet runner. A row of leather chairs against the wall. At the end, wide double mahogany doors with a brass plaque. Asterisk Conference Room A asterisk. Behind those doors sat 8 men who thought they had been summoned for an emergency operational review. They didn't yet know this was not a review. I walked down the hall slowly, hearing the thick carpet absorb my footsteps. Through the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the corridor, I saw the morning city. Gray, cold, alive. Somewhere out there, a few minutes away, my soon-to-be ex-husband was riding in a taxi or his own car. Riding to work. To his top executive title, his corner office overlooking the avenue, riding in with the absolute certainty that last night he had won. That everything was settled. That the plain Jane from the water department had packed her garbage bag and vanished. And now the road was clear. He didn't know that a deactivated turnstile was waiting for him in the lobby. He didn't know what was waiting for him on the 8th floor. He knew absolutely nothing. And that was exactly what I wanted. I grabbed the brass handle, pulled it, and walked in. 8 men sitting around the massive oval table looked up. Arthur Sterling was sitting third from the right. I was seeing him in person for the first time, broad-shouldered, thick-set, with the heavy, uncompromising stare of a man used to calling the shots. Right now, he was pale. Not just pale, that specific ashen, earthy color people turn when their body has already registered a catastrophe, but their brain is still frantically searching for an exit. He stared at me the way a man stares when he suddenly recognizes a random passerby as the one person he never, ever expected to see. Because he knew the name DeMarco. He knew about the trust, He knew the name of the founder. It had been mentioned in closed sessions as an abstraction. A distant, faceless entity. He probably imagined something entirely different. Not a 34-year-old woman in a white blouse walking toward the head of the table with the calm precision of someone walking into her own living room. I sat down and placed my hands flat on the table. Openly, evenly. The conference room was dead silent. Just the faint rustle of someone shuffling papers, someone clearing his throat into his fist. Harrison Vance stepped up to stand beside me. "Gentlemen," he announced, "allow me to introduce Zoe DeMarco, legally married as Zoe Edward, beneficiary and sole grantor of the Irrevocable Investment Trust Times Vanguard Active Asterisk, controlling 72% of the shares of Vanguard Holdings." He paused. "She is the majority controlling shareholder of this corporation and has convened this meeting pursuant to the corporate bylaws and SEC regulations regarding emergency shareholder intervention." The silence in the room grew thicker. Arthur Sterling slowly closed his eyes, then opened them, staring blankly ahead. His gaze held a lot of things, but above all, one: realization. The late, bitter, irreversible realization of the sheer scale of the mess he had walked into. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Harrison. He was standing right next to me but preferred to text so as not to interrupt the silence. One line. Asterisk. Max just walked through the revolving doors. Asterisk. I put the phone away and looked at the 8 faces around the table. "Let's begin," I said. Conference room A was massive, designed to seat at least 30 people. A long mahogany table, high-backed leather executive chairs, a glass wall looking out over the skyline. The morning was overcast. The sky choked with low clouds, making the city look muted and matte, like a photograph taken without a flash. In front of every seat on the table lay a binder. Identical leather-bound folders with the Vanguard logo embossed on the front. Inside were the audit printouts. Harrison had ensured everyone received a copy before the meeting started, so no one could claim they hadn't had time to review the materials. I sat at the head of the table and looked at the 8 men. The board of directors in its entirety. Different ages, different archetypes. One older man, sitting with military posture, looked at me with unconcealed interest and something bordering on approval, the look of a man who had long expected a shakeup and was pleased to see it arriving exactly like this. 2 middle-aged men exchanged nervous glances, trying to read my face to gauge how catastrophic this was going to be. 2 others stared fixedly into their open binders, a surefire sign of men who knew something they shouldn't and didn't want it written on their faces. One younger man, maybe 35, wearing an immaculate suit and a painfully expensive watch, sat perfectly still, acting as if none of this concerned him. And Arthur Sterling. He sat third from the right and hadn't spoken a single word since I walked in. Broad, heavy hands resting flat on the table. He stared straight ahead with an expression I identified instantly. A man calculating the odds. Not panicking, he was too experienced for panic. Just calculating, weighing, searching for the exact angle from which this situation could be managed. I saw the exact moment when Harrison said 72% of the shares that Arthur Sterling realized the angle didn't exist. "Let's begin," I repeated. Harrison Vance opened his portfolio. "Gentlemen," he said in a flat, clinical tone, "please open your binders to page 1. This is the master ledger of transactions for Vanguard Holdings, spanning the period from the appointment of CEO Max Edward to the present day. 4 months and 18 days. The rustle of heavy paper. Several men opened their binders. The older man with the military posture, I had already memorized his name. Samuel Prescott. The longest-serving board member put on his reading glasses and leaned over the spreadsheet. The young executive with the watch, Ian Nichols, also opened his eyes darting down the page. His face became even more unreadable than before. "The total volume of transactions requiring immediate justification," Harrison continued, "amounts to approximately $90 million. Of this, $42 million comprises contracts with independent logistics contractors, executed at rates exceeding market average by roughly 68%. Two of these contractors were incorporated less than 2 months prior to contract execution. The registered legal address for one of them is a residential apartment complex. The registered owner of the second is an individual with zero prior experience or operational footprint in the logistics or industrial sector. "Hold on," said one of the men who had been exchanging nervous glances. "Victor Olson, the chief financial officer. Those contracts passed through the finance department. They were vetted through standard procurement protocols." "Victor," Harrison replied mildly. "Standard procurement protocols require final authorization from the CEO. All 4 contracts were signed personally by Max Edward. The signatures have been verified." He paused. "Furthermore, I direct your attention to page 3. Itemized corporate representation and entertainment expenses. Page 3. I had seen it in the cab on my phone, but seeing it printed on heavy stock paper, inside a leather-bound corporate binder, it was different. It was official. It was documented. $23 million in representation expenses over 4 months, including custom Italian furniture shipped directly to Max Edward's private residence. 2 massive retail purchases at luxury menswear boutiques, billed to the corporate account but delivered to his personal address. A private, catered dinner for 40 guests at a high-end restaurant, expensed as client negotiations. On the exact night, said restaurant was hosting a birthday party for Max Edward's mother, Eleanor Irene. "This is standard practice for chief executives," Arthur Sterling interjected. The first time he had spoken since the meeting began. His voice was steady, but you could hear the sheer mechanical effort required to keep it that way. Representation expenses fall within his approved discretionary limits. The discretionary limit for the CEO position, as approved by this board, is $3 million per quarter, Harrison cut in. Softly, without raising his voice, but with lethal precision. In less than 5 months, he has spent $23 million, exceeding the limit by nearly 400%. Expenses exceeding the cap require board approval. Not a single authorization request was ever filed. Arthur Sterling fell silent. "Please turn to page 5, Harrison said. Page 5. The letter of intent regarding the corporate spin-off. I watched Samuel Prescott read it slowly, line by line. I watched his face gradually take on the expression of a man who discovers a live grenade hidden inside a familiar book. He took off his glasses, looked at me, then put them back on. "This is a signed document," Harrison noted. "Signed by CEO Max Edward and Board Director Arthur Sterling." He paused. "As well as Diana Sterling, listed as a future equity partner of the spun-off entity, via a deed of gift from her father." Samuel Prescott slowly turned his head to look at Arthur Sterling. Arthur was staring at the table. He had the face of a man who had lost, who knew he had lost, and who was now only wondering how much prison time this loss was going to cost him. "Arthur Sterling," I spoke up. The first time I had addressed the room, I spoke evenly, quietly, looking directly at him. "You are a sitting member of this board of directors. Your fiduciary duty is to act in the best interests of this corporation and its shareholders. This letter of intent was executed without notifying the controlling majority shareholder and without being brought to a general shareholder vote, which is a direct violation of the corporate charter." I paused. "Furthermore, you personally recommended Max Edward for the position of CEO, a man with whom you clearly had back-channel personal agreements regarding the transfer of corporate assets to your own daughter." The silence in the conference room was so profound you could hear the muffled roar of the city traffic far below the glass walls. "This can be explained differently," Arthur Sterling finally said. "Perhaps," I replied. "You will have the opportunity to explain it to the federal prosecutors." His face twitched. "Zoe," spoke up Ian Nichols, the young executive with the watch. He was the VP of New Market Development. "Could you clarify if you intend to refer these materials to law enforcement?" "The materials have already been referred," Harrison Vance answered. "A formal complaint was filed this morning with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI. Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 1343, Wire fraud and corporate embezzlement by an executive officer in excess of $50 million. A pause. Additionally, breach of fiduciary duty and corporate malfeasance. Victor Olson, the CFO, carefully closed his binder, placed it squarely in front of him, and sat up very straight. He looked exactly like a man desperately trying to reposition himself on a sinking ship. Zoe, he said, I want to personally assure you that the finance department operated strictly within our granted authority. If the audit reveals that we were misled during the authorization of these transactions, Victor, I interrupted quietly, the finance department will undergo an independent forensic audit. Right now, I am not asking for your justifications. I am asking you to listen. He clamped his mouth shut and nodded. Page 7. Harrison said. Page 7. The midnight transactions. The ones he had blocked. $50 million. 2 sums, 2 recipients. I didn't look at Arthur Sterling. I looked at the page, but in my peripheral vision, I saw him slowly, very slowly, lower his head. At 2:35 a.m., between Sunday and Monday, Harrison read, 2 wire transfers were initiated from Vanguard's primary operating account. The first, $20 million to Apex Freight Solutions, an LLC incorporated in Delaware 3 months ago. The sole registered founder and managing member is Max Edward, meaning the CEO himself. Pause. The second, $30 million to a personal checking account. Eleanor Irene, Max Edward's mother. Dead silence. Then Samuel Prescott slowly took off his reading glasses, placed them on the table, and pinched the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. The universal gesture of a man who needs a second to keep the profanity inside his head from spilling out. Both transfers were intercepted and blocked. Harrison continued. The funds remain secured in Vanguard's accounts. The bank has been notified. Max Edwards' personal accounts have been frozen via an emergency injunction filed by the majority shareholder pending the criminal investigation. Ian Nichols, the young executive, said quietly, that is incredibly sloppy, even by industry standards. It's called something else entirely, Samuel Prescott said. His voice was low and heavy as lead. I looked at my watch. 9:22 a.m. Max had walked into the building 8 minutes ago. Harrison had texted me the second it happened. That meant he was currently standing at the lobby turnstiles, aggressively tapping his ID badge against the scanner, finally realizing something was very, very wrong. Gentlemen, I said, I want to outline exactly what is happening right now and what will happen in the immediate future. First, Max Edward is terminated from his position as CEO, effective immediately. Grounds: gross violation of fiduciary duties, massive financial damages to the corporation, and blatant self-dealing. Terminated for cause. No severance. I spoke calmly, without raising my voice. The way you speak when a decision is final and no longer up for debate. Second, Arthur Sterling's membership on this board of directors is suspended immediately, pending the conclusion of the federal investigation. This decision is executed by me, as the majority shareholder, in accordance with our bylaws. Third, based on the results of the comprehensive forensic audit, decisions will be made regarding every employee involved in these transactions. The finance department, the legal department, corporate security, everyone will be investigated. Those who acted in good faith have nothing to fear. Those who acted otherwise, I highly recommend retaining independent legal counsel immediately. No one interrupted. Even Arthur Sterling sat frozen. And finally, I intend to personally deliver the termination notice to Max Edward right now, down in the lobby. I stood up. I invite anyone who feels their presence is necessary to accompany me. Harrison Vance was already standing beside me. Samuel Prescott slowly pushed his chair back, put his glasses in his breast pocket, picked up his binder carefully with both hands like handling physical evidence at a crime scene, and looked at me. I'll join. Ian Nichols also stood up in silence. Victor Olson stayed in his seat. He was ashen and appeared to be having a silent conversation with himself. Arthur Sterling didn't move. He stared at the table, his thick hands resting uselessly in front of him, looking like a man who suddenly had nowhere left to go. I walked out of the conference room. We headed down the corridor. Myself, Harrison Vance, Samuel Prescott, Ian Nichols, and the two corporate security men trailing silently behind. No one spoke in the elevator. I stared at the illuminated floor numbers and thought about how my mother had never seen this building. Never rode in this elevator. Never knew what this company would become decades later. She just did what she could and trusted me with the rest. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open. The main lobby. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors, the massive reception desk on the right, the security turnstiles in the center, the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out onto the avenue. The morning rush had ended. It was past 9. The lobby was relatively quiet. Just a few stragglers rushing to the gates and 2 security guards at their posts, and Max. He was standing at the VIP executive turnstile, with his back to us, but I recognized him instantly by his posture. The way he carried his shoulders, the dark gray corporate armor suit he had put on this morning for his victory lap. A leather briefcase sat by his feet. In his hand was his ID badge. He slapped it against the scanner again. Clearly not for the first time, judging by the tension in his back. Asterisk beep. Red X. Asterisk. He cursed under his breath, loud enough that the security guard at the adjacent desk shot him a look. "What kind of garbage is this?" Max snapped, no longer holding back. "What the hell is going on? Call IT down here. Your system is down." The security guard remained silent. He looked at Max blankly, without expression. Exactly the way a guard looks when he's already received his strict instructions and is simply waiting for the inevitable. Max spun around, probably looking for a lower-level employee to scream at, and saw us. I was walking from the elevator bank across the marble floor. Slowly. Back straight. Measured steps. Harrison Vance next to me, holding the portfolio. Samuel Prescott and Ian Nichols a step behind, flanked by the 2 men in dark suits. For a few seconds, Max just stared. I watched the exact progression of his realization. First, confusion. Then, a desperate attempt to rationalize it. Then, something I had never seen on his face before. Something I didn't have a word for until that moment. Then I realized. It was terror. Not sharp, explosive panic, but a slow, creeping dread. The kind of terror that sets in when you realize every single one of your calculations was wrong. That the chessboard you were playing on was actually a trapdoor. And you never even noticed. "Zoe," he breathed. His voice was still holding on. "What are you doing here?" "Max Edward," Harrison Vance said, stepping 1 pace closer. "Good morning. I am Harrison Vance, Managing Trustee of the Times Vanguard Active Times Investment Trust. You should have received a formal notification at the corporate email address listed in your employment contract. Sent at 8:47 a.m. today." Max blinked. "What? What trust?" He looked at me. "Zoe, what the hell is going on?" "Read the notification," I said. I didn't read any notification. His voice was starting to lose its footing. "I came to work. My badge doesn't work. And now you show up with some random people." "Max," I said evenly. "Your badge doesn't work because it was deactivated this morning by order of the controlling majority shareholder of Vanguard Holdings." "What? What shareholder?" "I was appointed by the board of directors. I am the CEO. You no longer hold that position." Harrison cut in. "The decision to terminate your employment was executed this morning. Grounds. Severe financial damage to the corporation via the embezzlement of corporate funds on a massive scale. The formal termination paperwork is being finalized. You will receive a copy via certified mail." Max stood frozen, looking from Harrison to me and back again. A frantic internal machinery was turning behind his eyes. I watched him try to reconstruct the logic of the situation, trying to find a loophole. an angle, a loose thread he could pull. The narcissist inside him simply refused to accept what was happening right in front of him. It was too massive, too sudden, too absolute. "What embezzlement?" he said finally. His voice hardened. Not calmer, but harder. Armed with that aggressive bluster people use to mimic confidence when actual confidence is gone. "I signed those contracts within the scope of my executive authority. I spent funds within the approved operational budget. Those were my decisions as CEO. If anyone has an issue with that, we can settle it in corporate arbitration." "We are settling it," Harrison agreed. A criminal complaint was filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI at 8:15 a.m. this morning. Title 18, Section 1343, Wire Fraud. Max flinched. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, opening his portfolio and pulling out a single sheet of paper. "During the internal forensic audit, our systems flagged an attempt to execute unauthorized wire transfers last night, Sunday into Monday. 2 authorizations totaling $50 million. One recipient being Apex Freight Solutions, an LLC where you are the sole registered owner. The second recipient, Eleanor Irene." He held the paper out. The transfers were blocked. "Here is the transaction log." Max took the paper. He stared at it for several seconds, then slowly lowered it. By this point, the lobby had noticed. Several employees passing by had slowed their pace. 2 receptionists behind the main desk were watching in dead silence. The security guard stood perfectly still. "This is a setup," Max said. Quietly, almost to himself. Then louder. "This is a setup. You forged these documents. This is a hostile corporate takeover." He whipped around to face me. "This is you. You orchestrated this because of the divorce, because I kicked you out. And you wanted revenge. You found some corporate raiders and helped them fabricate these papers." "Max," I said. Just his name, but with the exact tone you use to stop a man sprinting toward a cliff edge. He fell silent. "I am going to explain something to you," I said. "Not because you deserve an explanation, but because you need to understand it before you make your next move." I spoke flatly, devoid of anger or triumph, just stating facts. The Times Vanguard Active Times Investment Trust was established by my mother 8 years ago. 72% of the shares of this conglomerate belong to me personally, as the sole beneficiary of that trust. This is not a forgery. This is not a hostile takeover. These are my shares. They have been mine since the day my mother died. I let the pause stretch. You lived next to me for 7 years, and you had no idea. Max stood there, staring at me. His face cycled through a dozen expressions, fast as a slide projector. Disbelief, denial, dawning comprehension, another desperate wave of denial, and finally, that ultimate expression, the one I had only seen once before in my life. The face of a man who realizes he hasn't just lost everything, but that he dismantled his own life with his own 2 hands. "You," he started. 4 months. I continued, cutting him off. "In 4 months, you managed to sign fraudulent vendor contracts, exceed your budget by 400%, sign a letter of intent giving corporate assets to your cronies, and attempt to wire $50 million of stolen money to your own shell company and your mother's personal checking account." I took a breath. "All of it is documented. All of it is already sitting on an FBI agent's desk." He swallowed hard. "Zoe," he breathed, and a completely new tone crept into his voice. Something I never expected to hear. Not an apology, no. A desperate attempt to reach for an old tool that used to work. His voice dropped, softening. "Listen, let's talk about this normally. Not here. Not in front of people. I know you're hurt. What happened last night? I overreacted. My mom overreacted. We can fix this like civilized people. Let's sit down, talk it out, find a reasonable solution." "A reasonable solution," I echoed. "You're a smart woman. You know that if this goes to court..." If the feds get involved, it's bad for everyone. The company's stock will tank. Your reputation will suffer. Max, I said, I know you are trying to negotiate your way out of this right now. But you are about 8 hours too late. The criminal complaints are filed. The bank accounts are frozen. You were fired the second the sun came up. I looked him dead in the eye. There is nothing left to talk about. He stood there, looking from me to Harrison, then back to me. Something inside him was still frantically searching for an exit, still calculating, but it was just the inertia of a dead engine spinning after the ignition is cut. Then he yanked out his phone. I'm calling Arthur Sterling, he snarled. He'll explain to you who actually runs things around here. He's on the board. He put me here. He won't let this happen. Arthur Sterling is currently on the 8th floor. Harrison Vance noted dryly. His board membership is suspended. Furthermore, he is named as a co-conspirator in the exact same federal filings as you. A pause. Call him if you wish. Max dialed the number. I heard the dial tone. He put it on speakerphone, clearly wanting the entire lobby to hear Arthur shut us down. Ring. Second ring. Third ring. On the 4th ring, Arthur Sterling answered. Arthur, Max said rapidly. There's some insane corporate lawyer down here with forged papers. They're telling me I'm fired, that my wife is the majority shareholder. It's a delusional setup. Tell them. Arthur Sterling's voice coming through the tinny phone speaker made the entire lobby freeze. The receptionists exchanged wide-eyed looks. The security guards stiffened. The voice did not sound like an ally. It sounded like a man standing on the edge of a skyscraper, staring straight down, trying to figure out how to avoid the pavement. Shut your mouth. Max froze. Just shut your mouth and listen to me, Arthur continued, and in his voice was the raw, primal terror of a man grasping the totality of his ruin. Do you have any idea who you messed with? Do you have any idea who that woman is? Because of you, you arrogant idiot, my assets are frozen. All of them. My personal accounts, the corporate accounts, the offshore accounts. Diana is having a hysterical breakdown. They are pulling our passports. His voice cracked, splintering into a hoarse scream. If you don't drop to your knees and beg her for forgiveness right now, in front of everyone, I will personally make sure you get the absolute maximum sentence in federal prison. Do you hear me? The maximum. And pray to whatever God you believe in that she doesn't hand everything she has over to the U.S. attorney, because my signature is on those documents too, and you damn well know it. The line went dead. The silence in the marble lobby was absolute. That specific silence that occurs when dozens of people simultaneously hear something so damning that no one can pretend they didn't hear it. Max stood with his arm extended, holding the phone. The screen timed out and went black. He stared at it, then slowly lowered his hand. His face was the color of chalk. A few employees standing near the elevators whispered fiercely to one another. Someone pulled out a phone to record. The security guard stared straight ahead, radiating the aura of a man who sees everything but will never testify to it. Samuel Prescott, standing just behind me, muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "Well, that is what you call writing your own death warrant." Max raised his eyes to me. In his gaze, there was absolutely nothing left of the man I had known for 7 years. No charm, no arrogance, no persuasive magnetism that had hooked me in the first place. There was only what is left when the facade is completely stripped away. The utter bewilderment of a man who suddenly realizes he is standing on thin air, right where the floor used to be. "Zoe," he whispered. "Just my name. No continuation." "Max," I replied, equally quiet. "You have the legal right to retain an attorney. Use it. That is the only piece of advice I can give you." I turned around and walked toward the elevators. Harrison Vance walked beside me. Samuel Prescott and Ian Nichols followed. The 2 corporate security guards remained in the lobby to ensure Max vacated the premises without incident. I didn't look back. In the elevator, as the doors slid shut, Samuel Prescott sighed heavily. "Zoe, I have served on corporate boards for 32 years. I have never seen anything like this. Like what? I asked. A man doing that in 4 months. He shook his head, looking almost impressed by the sheer stupidity. He was just living the way he felt entitled to live, I said. He just didn't know someone was keeping the receipts. Samuel Prescott looked at me, then said simply, without any flattery, "Your mother was a very smart woman." Yes, I agreed. She was. The elevator hummed as it rose back to the 8th floor. We still had hours of work ahead of us. Conference rooms, legal documents, line-by-line resolutions for the audit findings. All of that was still to come. But the most important thing, the reason I had come here this morning, was done. The doors opened. I stepped out onto the burgundy carpet, walked past the row of leather chairs, and stopped by the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the hall. I looked out at the city, a gray October morning, low clouds, wet rooftops, an ordinary Monday. The world outside didn't know what had just happened in this building, and it didn't care. It was as indifferent as it had always been. I took out my phone and texted Rachel one word. Asterisk. Done. Asterisk. She replied 20 seconds later. A single, quiet, smiley face. Exactly like her. I put the phone away and walked back into conference room A. The next few hours were strictly operational. No drama, no raised voices. Just corporate governance. Harrison Vance led the meeting methodically, line by line, document by document. Every board member had the chance to ask questions and clarify their position. Victor Olson, the CFO, provided an exhaustive explanation of his department's oversight, with spreadsheets and timestamps, and as the picture clarified, it became obvious that he genuinely had not known the true nature of the fraudulent transactions. His signature was missing precisely where it would have been required had he been in the loop. It didn't absolve him of negligence, but it changed the severity of his liability. Ian Nichols proved to be exactly what he looked like from minute one. A sharp, professional executive who minded his own division and didn't poke around in others. He asked several highly precise questions about the interim management structure, all business. No panic, and I respected that. Arthur Sterling did not speak a single word for the rest of the meeting. He sat staring at the wood grain of the table. There was a heavy, visceral reality to it. This wasn't a performance. This was a man confronting the price of his own greed. That realization doesn't always come in time. By 1 p.m., I had signed 3 documents. First, the formal termination of CEO Max Edward, with cause, barring any severance packages or stock options. Second, the suspension of Arthur Sterling from the board of directors. Third, an executive order launching a full, independent forensic audit of all Vanguard Holdings subsidiaries, utilizing a top-tier external accounting firm. Harrison Vance collected the documents and tucked them neatly into his portfolio. "Zoe," he said quietly, as the room began to clear. "There is one more matter. The apartment." Yes. The civil suit for equitable distribution of marital assets was filed this morning concurrently with the criminal complaints. We submitted the full 7-year payment history, monthly mortgage payments originating from your personal checking account, without interruption, from day one. He opened another tab in his folder. The deed is in Max Edwards' name. However, under state family law, property acquired during the marriage and serviced by marital or personal funds is subject to equitable distribution. The paper trail is airtight. Given the parallel federal criminal case, family court will likely expedite this. He paused. I also want to note, as part of the federal wire fraud investigation, the U.S. Attorney has the authority to seize Max Edwards' assets, including the apartment, prior to conviction. This acts as an ironclad safeguard against him trying to sell or transfer the property. Good, I said. Zoe, he said after a moment, his tone shifting. If you will permit me, I would like to say something slightly outside the bounds of our attorney-client relationship. I looked at him. Over the course of 8 years, Harrison rarely stepped out of his rigid professional framework. I could count on one hand the times he had spoken personally. Of course, I said. Natalie worried constantly that she wouldn't be here to protect you. Those were her exact words. She told me that during one of our very last meetings. She said, "Harrison, I can't be there to guard her. I can only give her a weapon." He paused. "I think today, she would be exceptionally proud of how you used it." I didn't answer. I just nodded. Sometimes words only ruin things. I left the conference room shortly after 1 p.m. The corridor was quiet. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. Through the glass wall at the end of the hall, the city stretched out below. By midday, the clouds had broken slightly, and pale autumn sunlight spilled through the gaps, hitting the edges of the skyscrapers with a cold gold light. I stopped by the window and pulled out my phone. Several missed calls. Max's number. 3 of them. I stared at the notifications, wondering what he wanted to say. To justify himself again? To threaten? To beg? I didn't call back. I deleted the notifications and slipped the phone into my bag. Then I took it out again and texted my mother. Not an actual text, I just opened my photo gallery and found her picture. The last one I had of her. She was sitting at the kitchen table in an oversized sweater, holding a mug, looking off to the side, not at the camera, smiling at some private thought. I took it secretly. She didn't know. Just a regular autumn day. A few months before the diagnosis, I stared at the photo for a long time, not with agonizing pain, but with that quiet, settled grief that doesn't destroy you, it just lives quietly beside you. Then I put the phone away. What happened next, in the following weeks and months, I will summarize briefly. Not because it isn't important, but because the most important thing already happened that morning in the lobby. Everything else was just the fallout. The federal wire fraud and embezzlement case moved incredibly fast. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office had a fully pre-packaged case, handed to them on a silver platter by Harrison Vance. Max was hauled in for questioning on the 3rd day, then again and again. His defense attorney, a very expensive, aggressive litigator who specialized in delaying tactics, did what he could. But with a paper trail that thick and damning, dragging it out was nearly impossible. Simultaneously, the civil divorce proceedings and asset division moved forward. The family court judge set the first hearing for 3 weeks later, lightning speed for the legal system. During the hearing, my legal team presented 7 years of mortgage receipts, bank statements, and wire transfer records. Max's lawyer tried to argue that these payments were voluntary gifts that did not entitle me to equity. The judge reviewed the files, asked a few pointed questions, and called a recess until the next hearing. Max didn't show up to the second hearing. His lawyer claimed a scheduling conflict. The judge ruled without him. The apartment was classified as marital property subject to division. Given that I had solely serviced the debt, Max's equity was reduced to a bare minimum 20%. His lawyer filed an appeal. The appeal was summarily dismissed. I never went back to that apartment, not because I was afraid or couldn't bear it. I just didn't want to. It held too many things I had outgrown. I surrendered my equity share as collateral against the court-ordered reimbursement of the mortgage payments Max owed me, though his ability to pay anyone anything was rapidly evaporating. The apartment was eventually sent to auction as part of the asset forfeiture linked to the federal criminal case. Eleanor found out about everything the very same day. Not from me, but from her son, when he returned to her house after the lobby confrontation. What exactly he told her, I don't know. I only know that the $30 million he tried to wire her in the middle of the night never arrived. The payment was permanently blocked. The luxury vacation to Street Barts she had booked remained unpaid. The new diamond necklace she planned to buy stayed in the catalog. Sometime later, word reached me through mutual acquaintances. Eleanor was spreading rumors that everything was my fault, that I had deliberately framed her son, that it was a vindictive, calculated revenge plot by a bitter ex-wife who had nothing better to do. I didn't bother refuting it. There was no point. Arthur Sterling became a co-defendant in the same federal indictment, charged with corporate malfeasance and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. His white-collar defense team was working overtime to keep him out of prison. Diana left the city. Where exactly? I didn't know and didn't care to ask. Vanguard Holdings continued to operate. That was important. More important than anything else. Thousands of people worked there. They had families, mortgages, lives. The company had contracts and obligations to fulfill. I spent several weeks deeply immersed in the transition, working alongside Harrison Vance, Samuel Prescott, and Ian Nichols, who proved to be exactly as reliable and professional as I had hoped. An interim CEO was appointed from within the existing ranks, a calm, experienced VP who had been with the company for a decade. Not flashy, not charismatic, not someone who thought outside the box, just a fundamentally competent professional who could be trusted to keep the ship steady. Sometimes, the smartest corporate decision is exactly that. I stayed at Rachel's house for the first few weeks while I looked for a place of my own. I eventually found a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet, leafy neighborhood. No floor-to-ceiling windows, no ultra-modern luxury aesthetic, just old oak trees outside the window and a great bookstore a 5-minute walk away. The landlord, an older gentleman renting it out for the first time, was incredibly nervous, asking me 100 times if everything was to my liking. I told him, yes, everything is perfect. I returned to my job at the municipal water lab. My coworkers clearly knew something had happened. I had taken several days of unpaid leave, which was out of character, but no one prodded. One morning, someone simply left a thermos of hot tea on my desk, without asking, without explaining. I set it next to my sample racks and got back to work. I liked my job. I had always liked it. Before Max, during Max, and after Max. It was one of the few places where I never had doubts. Viruses don't lie. Chemical compounds don't try to steal your assets. With them, everything is clear. 2 months after that morning in the corporate lobby, I drove to the cemetery. My mother's grave was in the far sector. A quiet place, shaded by a few old maple trees, with a stone bench. I didn't come here often, but always at the same time of year. Late autumn, when the leaves had already fallen and the sky was exactly like it was on that day, gray, crisp, and real. I stood by the headstone without saying anything. That was a trait I inherited from her, too. She didn't like words when presence was enough. Just to be there. Just to let them know. Then I said quietly, I used the weapon. You were right. The maple trees remained silent. A gust of wind rustled the dead leaves on the ground. Dry. Scraping. Entirely ordinary. I stood there a little longer, adjusted the flowers I had brought, turned around, and walked toward the exit. On my way home, I stopped at a coffee shop. A small, cramped place with fogged-up windows smelling heavily of cinnamon and roasted beans. I got my coffee, sat by the window, and watched the street. People walked by, someone with an umbrella, someone without. Kids dragging their parents toward a bakery display. A completely ordinary life. No screaming matches, no hostile takeovers, no trash bags by the door, just life. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. I answered. Zoe DeMarco? The voice was unfamiliar, brisk, slightly eager. This is a reporter from Times The Business Forum *. We've been tracking the recent executive shakeup at Vanguard Holdings. We are putting together a feature piece on the new faces of American corporate leadership. Would you be willing to give us a brief comment, or perhaps sit down for an exclusive interview? I thought about it for 1 second. No, I said. I hung up the phone and finished my coffee. Outside the window, a regular Tuesday was unfolding. The maple trees lining the avenue stood bare and straight, and the wind swayed their top branches just enough to show that they were alive. I thought about my mother. About something she told me a very long time ago. Zoe, she had said, strength isn't what you do to the people who hurt you. Strength is what you do with yourself after. I hadn't quite understood her then, but now, I think I do. I stood up, put on my coat, and walked out onto the street. The city kept living, and I lived right along with it.